Hi, it's Henry Shelford Chairperson of SarcoidosisUK. Really excited to have Dr Robina Coker here today to answer everyone's question on returning to work and shielding. Hello, Robina.
Hello, Henry.
Look, it's wonderful to see you. It's always wonderful, and thank you as ever for your time. You and I are both sporting very nice new haircuts.
Indeed. Yes.
So I think we've both been able to go out and visit our hairdressers as a part of the removal of lockdown and the changes we're all seeing, which is obviously very important. We have had a lot of questions coming in on this, and to everyone who sent them in, we've tried to consolidate as many as we can. So if your specific question is, we'll try and give you a name check, but we'll also try and make sure that, and you should see your question in there. So look, we're really lucky to have Robina here. She is a consultant and honorary senior lecturer in respiratory medicine at Hammersmith Hospital and Imperial College London. She is not only a doctor, she's a doctor twice over. She has a PhD in the development of lung fibrosis. And she's clinical director of the Northwest London NIHR Clinical Research Network, one of 15 CRNs in the country. This is an annual budget of over 14 million and supports clinical trials across Northwest London. So we could not have a better person, and she's absolutely, it's fantastic that we've got her, and thank you again.
Very well.
Right, are we ready for the start of the questions? So we started with keeping them initially quite generic in terms of the questions which were broader coming in from everyone, and then then they get much more specific about people's individual situation, which I think, to give people a heads up, like obviously Robina is not a specialist in your workplace, but I think she'll try her best. Right, so we've had a lot of questions about people's own or their partner's workplace. We've had Claire who works in a hospice, Lisa as a theatre nurse, Shelley a lecturer, Tink in education, and Elaine's partner works in a building site, and many more, but that gives you a good idea of the variety. And so their main question is, what should people do to stay safe?
Yes. Well, it's a very important question. And for people particularly who've been shielding, of course, it can be quite a change to go out and about. And many people may not have been aware of some of the changes that have been taking place in workplaces and in public settings. The first thing I think we need to remember is that the key messages about washing your hands thoroughly and frequently remain, about maintaining social distancing, which in this country has been set at 2 meters or a 1 meter plus, so that if you can't maintain that level of social distancing, you should be wearing a mask. Wearing masks in indoor spaces is really important. Those are the very obvious things that we can all do and should continue to do throughout, regardless. Now, there are a few exceptions, obviously, but those are the main messages, and the hand washing is absolutely key, and not touching your face. We've talked about that in previous videos. So those are the general things. I think the next thing to do is, it's very useful, I think, to go and have a look at the www.gov.uk website, which has a lot of information on COVID-19 and has advice for employers in, I think it's 14 different work settings, about how they can try and make their workplaces COVID secure. And I think if you start with that, you can have an idea of what sort of measures are being considered and what sort of things employers are being expected to do. I would say to anybody who's returning to work that you should, the employer and the workplace should have done a risk assessment. They should have shared that risk assessment, and there should have been consultation with employees and or unions, depending obviously on the size of the employer and the setting. But those things should have been done. And I think, depending on your workplace, you're in a very good position if you go back with the recommendations from the UK government to say, well, now look, what's happening, what's been happening while I've been away, what measures have you put in place? And then, depending on the size of your organisation, I think everybody should have a risk assessment. And I certainly think anybody who's working in the NHS should be having an occupational health assessment to judge your individual risk and what precautions can be put in place. Now, obviously, for some people, they can be redeployed to a lower risk setting, and that will depend on their individual circumstances. We'll come on to this later, as you said. But certainly, I think an early conversation with the employer, some early questions about what are the measures that you have put in place as my employer to keep people safe, and if necessary, a conversation with your union or your colleagues about what's happening. Some of your colleagues may already have returned to work or be working throughout and may have some information which you may find useful. You may find it less daunting to approach your employer if you're doing it as part of a group of employees, just having that conversation. And I think most employers are trying very hard to do the right thing by their staff, because they don't want outbreaks and they don't want people off sick. We've seen that where people work in very crowded conditions with limited washroom facilities and so on, that is very much a predisposition to outbreaks. That's probably no surprise to anyone. And those employers are being investigated. And although the government is not going to be able to visit every single workplace, there's undoubtedly a level of inspection. So outbreaks will flag up the attention of local public health bodies and so on.
I think that's a fantastic introduction to to what everyone needs to do. And focusing, you've actually done a fantastic job of jumping ahead and answering one of the questions that's going to come later. But we're going to answer it in a bit more detail as well. On to some specifics. So Claire works in a children's hospice as a clinical support worker, and specifically asked how far apart should she stay from others. And although she's not specific on it, I think the others includes other staff members and, of course, patients. And that's clearly something you can talk to from you and what you're doing in your role.
Yeah. Well, the guidance is 2 meters or 1 meter plus. So if you can't stay within 2 meters apart, then you're going to need to wear a mask and remember again to wash your hands very frequently. There is, again, advice on the government.uk website about children's facilities, particularly working with children and working with children in social care settings. And I think I would expect those settings to have put as many measures in place as possible and to be sympathetic to someone who also has health needs themselves. So again, it's about that conversation with your line manager about particular circumstances.
Now, one of the things I'm hearing from your answers, there's an inference that there isn't a perfect.
Yes, I think that's right. When I was thinking about this earlier, I think there are probably 4 things you need to consider. So you need to consider your own health and where you are with your health. Is your condition very well controlled, or has it flared recently? Is it in the process of flaring? I think you need to consider your medication, because some medication may put you at increased risk of infection. Then I think you need to consider the environment that you're returning to. So that will probably be very different if you are, for instance, a landscape gardener, working from home 3 days a week, just making designs and then meeting customers outdoors, socially distanced 2 days a week, for instance. That will be very different from working indoors in a healthcare setting where you've got very vulnerable clients that you're looking after and having to provide intimate care for. So that's completely different. So I think we need to look at the environment. And I think there's also an individual's approach to risk. And that is something that we all have to do and have had to do for all our lives on a regular basis, but we generally don't think about it too much. So we have to make a decision whether we're going to fly on a plane or we're going to go on holiday to, for instance, a tropical climate, or we're going to drive a car, we're going to cross the road, we're going to take up an extreme sport, or perhaps a less extreme sport, horse riding, for instance, or we want to do bungee jumping for charity. Some people
very good. And parachuting, which like literally you think about it, you're flying through the air, like you couldn't be more outdoors. Like it's perfect.
That's fine.
Well, then you have to do it on your own.
There are other risks attached. So I think we all have different approaches to risk, and we all know people who are very risk averse and others who are much more relaxed. The difficulty is with this virus, we can't completely eliminate risk. I mean, we've seen this very forcibly highlighted in the last few days with government changes to holidays abroad, particularly in Spain, that, at one point the risk looks to be acceptable and the next minute it doesn't. And the situation changes very quickly. So I don't think it's possible to eliminate risk. I think we all have to decide how to manage the risk for ourselves so that we are comfortable. And to some extent, I do think it's very important that those conversations with employers take place, and that employers are supportive, and that if your employer is not supportive, you get additional support, as I say, either from colleagues or a union or a friend. But at the end of the day, you also have to make a decision about your long-term financial situation and future, and that is something that nobody else can do for you. Or are you someone, as I had a good long-standing patient of mine a few weeks ago say to me, Dr. Coker, if I don't return to work, I shall go mad. My mental health will not support this. My employer's been fantastic. They put in every possible measure they can, and I want to go because I need to see people. I need to have contact with people, and it's driving me completely insane being indoors all the time and not seeing anyone except on Zoom. Now, they made that decision because they decided that was what they needed to do for their own mental health, and I think that's perfectly right. We have to have adult conversations about what's right for us. Some people are much more introverted and have actually rather enjoyed lockdown and have learned a new skill or such. But not everybody does. Some of us are more gregarious than others.
I'm very jealous of those who've had lots of time and learned a new skill. I have a 1-year-old and 2-year-old at home. It's been busy. It's
yes,
obviously lovely having them. Certainly, but we as an office at SarcoidosisUK, we've been mostly working from home, and then some working in the office, and we've seen more working in the office, through recent weeks. And I think that balance is probably going to be our permanent, our new norm.
Yes.
Now I'm going to jump some questions, because you actually, I want to quickly talk about Claire, because Claire talked about being in a clinical setting, and this 2 meters, 1 meter plus part, and the bit I think needed to be talked to is that if you are in a clinical setting, then you may be touching people, and and your employer, be it the NHS or someone else, needs to have done a risk assessment on that and put measures in place. But there isn't a de facto, no, you mustn't touch anyone rule. There must be a risk assessment in place and the proper procedures put in place.
Yes, and most employers in that situation will have put in place the fact that you need to wear a mask, usually a surgical mask in a healthcare setting, that you'll need to wear an apron, disposable apron, and you'll need to wear disposable gloves, and they will all be readily available.
Yes, they very much should be. And talking of masks, it would be completely remiss of me if I was not to point out these fantastic SarcoidosisUK masks with our branding on them. It says, "I support SarcoidosisUK." For those that are able to wear masks, and they are available on our shop, and essentially provides a donation for us at the same time. For those that can't wear a mask, and I think this is an important one for us to cover, we have a badge which says, I can't wear a mask, I have a lung condition. And we have two other badges. One is, my cough is not contagious, I have sarcoidosis. And we have another which says, I have a lung condition, be extra careful around me. And in the going back to the workplace, actually having a statement there saying, like, look, I understand, like, I think we all know, we've all seen people who are kind of a bit careless with themselves, and in doing so can end up being a bit careless around other people, and it helps draw that line to say, like, you need to be careful. As always, they're obviously available on the shop, but actually, if you can't, if you're watching, you can't afford them, I think 2 badges are £2.50, 2 masks £7.50. We're a charity, so we will send them to you for free. But if you'd like them, or if you'd like to donate through buying them, that is also great. Particularly as we can't do events right now. Right. The advert over. Tink, I'm going to jump. Tink asked, because I think you've covered on this, talked about it quite a lot. So Tink emailed in. She said, "I'll be returning to work next week. At present, no risk assessment has been completed. I work in education. We're being encouraged to wear masks, and I assume this kind of mask, so not a medical mask. And this causes concern once all the kids return in August. How do I ensure I'm safe?" And we had another similar one from Craig saying, "My workplace is refusing to implement social distancing. What can I do?"
Yeah, as I say, I think that's very, very difficult. Now, it may be, and I don't know, maybe that some educational establishments have not got their risk assessment process finalised because they still think they've got a bit of time. So we've got, I guess, 4 weeks before September when the schools have to go back. So it may be a question of time. It may well be that they're struggling with their facilities to work it out, because it is quite a challenge.
Although schools have been back, they were open for key workers, although with many fewer people.
Absolutely, but of course very reduced numbers. So I think that may be the case, but it would be worth finding out. I assume there's either an occupational health or an HR department that could also answer queries. I think, obviously, there are some environments where social distancing is extremely difficult, particularly with small children. The government's advice then is that employers should try to maintain small groups and keep those groups together, so that there isn't a lot of moving around of individuals or one staff individual from group to group. So those groups are kept together almost like support bubbles during the day. It also, of course, if anybody does fall ill, it does facilitate contact tracing very considerably. But I would encourage people to talk to their other colleagues and say, this is what I've heard, what's your understanding? And should we be speaking to somebody? Because I do think that there is some power and authority in speaking as a team and saying, look, how can we help? We're happy to have some input into this, but what is it that's needed?
Now, you obviously have the medical answers, and I wanted to have some of the other kind of answers. To make some things clear, so all employers with over 5 full-time staff or full-time equivalents, so if there's enough part-time staff to equal 5, must have a written risk assessment. And below that, they can have a verbal discussed one. Above that, it must be written. And in these scenarios, it seems clear that they're talking about this, and Craig talking about refusing to implement social distancing. Where individuals are flouting the rules, you can call the police. And probably on their local number rather than obviously the emergency number. Where businesses are flouting the rules, you've got two groups you can contact. You can contact your local council, and I've looked here, and they have a specialist web page, and I seem set up for that. You can also contact the Health and Safety Executive, who also have a specialist area set up for that, and they do have inspectors and obviously the ability to shut down businesses as well. So those are two groups that you can definitively talk to, and if you're not getting anywhere with your personal direct conversation, or to be honest, there's an area, isn't there? Look, this is your job, and there's a lot of redundancies around, and you can sometimes feel like if you're the one sticking your head above the parapet, you're putting yourself at risk. You're the difficult one, and obviously that shouldn't happen. But you may feel it, and so being able to talk to one of these organisations, so they approach without reference to you, and then bring that forward for you. I think that could be a very useful mechanism. And
I think that's extremely helpful, Henry. But I do also think it may be useful to do it as a group.
I think
because if you say we're not happy, I think they're going to find it much harder to think that it's one person agitating who's unhappy, and they're probably more likely to take it seriously. Well, I'm not suggesting that an individual shouldn't if that's all they can do. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think it's all good points. Both of us. Right. I'm going to go back into some of the more general questions again. There's only one more actually. This one, Scott told us he works in an office and asks if he should, should I still work from home as much as possible?
So the government's advice, actually, despite the move recently to try and reopen the economy more fully, is still that if you can work from home, you should. But it's a slightly mixed message.
It is, but don't you think that for us, for people shielding, like it's fine. Like if you're someone, you're young and you're healthy, then it's very little.
Yeah.
The difference is not so big for you. But if someone's shielding, like actually, it can add that risk.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense for people to work from home if they can, or as much as they can, providing they can do their job from home, of course. And then that needs an agreement with your employer and with your line manager about how you're going to work from home, what you're going to do, and what the arrangements are for supervision, mentoring, and support, and so on. And it may well be that your employer will want you to come in 1 or 2 days a week, because there may be things that you can't do physically, or that you are needed to take part in certain activities on site that are essential. But it makes sense for people to work from home, not only for people who are vulnerable, but also actually for everyone else who is trying to avoid overcrowding on public transport, crowded roads, because a lot of people now driving who weren't driving, and so on. So I think it's actually not unreasonable at all to try and work from home where possible. But I know many employers would like to see their employees some of the time. Yeah,
and it's very nice seeing Leo who's helping with the appropriate isn't helping with the video, thank you. Yeah, thank you for all the good work you're doing, So into a bit more in-depth questions. So you asked, you've been talking a lot about the need for us to talk with our employer. And so Liam asked a really great question. And it's like, I work in a factory which has measures in place, face masks, daily temperature checks, social distancing. And I've been asked to return to work in mid-August, where a special risk assessment will be carried out for me. Is there... which does sound so far very good. Is there anything special or extra I should be looking for? So when he has that risk assessment, I think it's a really great question, particularly for those people who maybe are following this, going to be going to their employer and saying, I would like a special risk assessment. So what is the special things they should be looking for?
So I think that's a really great question. The first thing I'd say is have on your phone, assuming you have a smartphone, have your list of medication, so scan that and upload it. Have if you can, a letter from your clinic, your consultant, your respiratory specialist, your sarcoid specialist, or something from your GP, just outlining your condition. I think it doesn't have to be a special letter, but just, as I say, your latest clinic letter or something that's been written that summarises your condition. And you should, for some time now, have been getting copies of your clinic letters. So I think it's very good practice to have the latest, the last 2 or 3, or the most informative on your phone, so that you can show them to anyone who wants to see them. So I think that's the first thing, and that will give your employer the specific information about you, which needs to be taken into account when doing a risk assessment. And then I think if I were in your situation,
do you want to convey anything? Because like, if the letter just says, you've got sarcoidosis, like, we have trouble. Some doctors aren't that familiar with sarcoidosis, so employers aren't going to know.
No, it's going to be difficult to get somebody to write a specific letter at the moment. But you may have some idea from those letters whether your condition is well controlled, what your symptoms are, what medication you're on, you still requiring a lot of immunosuppression, those sorts of things, really. And the letter usually will say something like, appears well, symptoms well controlled, we will continue with the maintenance treatment, or, struggling, and I think we need to increase treatment. So that I would expect a letter to have some indication of where people are, possibly some lung function. And you will have, many organisations, the larger ones, will have doctors in occupational health, or they will have access to an occupational health physician, who will then be able to review that, or an occupational nurse, health nurse, who will then be able to contact, if necessary, your sarcoidosis specialist. But I think having some information is good, and helps you to be prepared. And then I think the other thing I would do is go to the www.gov.uk website and have a look at what the government is recommending for your type of workplace, and look at that and think, well, does that meet my needs, or do I think I need more? For instance, if I'm going to sit in a shared office for long periods of time, do I need sneeze guards or whatever? That's just an example.
I think that advice to go look at the government website is a very important and useful one. And so your advice here is take his letters so they know a bit more about it. Look through the government advice on the specifics of his industry, and then in terms of the risk assessment, make sure that it does consider sarcoidosis properly, so someone does actually understand it and doesn't just sort of do something very general.
Yes, I think that's right, Henry. And the other thing, of course, is that Sarcoidosis UK produced some very good leaflets on sarcoidosis for the employer.
You're very good.
So I would, if it were me, I would go armed with one of those as well, or even send it in with a brief note or email it beforehand, and say, I'm looking forward to our meeting. Thank you very much for offering it. And this is just some information from Sarcoidosis UK which you might find helpful, when we do my risk assessment.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I already adore you, and I adore you even more for mentioning that we have our leaflets. We've worked very hard on, and usually with the involvement of specialists. I know you've been involved too in some of them. And they're available either as download as a PDF. They're just on the website. You can and we can post them to you as well. All there. On the other side of the coin, Bhavini asked the question, I think, for lots of people who are in remission, which is, my sarcoidosis is dormant, and I've been asked by work to return in September. And what discussion should they have with their employer?
Yes, I mean, this is, of course, a slightly evidence-free zone. If your sarcoidosis is dormant, and by that I assume you mean that you're well and you're not taking medication.
Yeah, I took that to mean in remission. Yeah.
I would hope your risk would be relatively low. I suppose I would be a little more concerned if you had residual lung disease, for instance. So if you had residual scarring of the lungs, there probably is an increased risk. We don't know what that is. It's going to mean, I don't think it would put you at greater risk of catching an infection, but I think it could mean that if you do get it, the effects could be more severe because you already have some damage to your lungs. We've talked about this before in previous videos. So there isn't really good evidence, but I think it would depend, as I say, on where you were on that spectrum. So do you have a chest x-ray that is to all intents and purposes normal, in which case I would hope your risk would be low, or do you have some lung damage, in which case I think your risk is a little higher, but not as high as somebody who's got very active disease who's requiring a lot of immunosuppression, because people who are taking a lot of immunosuppression are going to be more at risk of catching the disease and then possibly not responding to it as well. If you're not taking the immunosuppression, you shouldn't be at greater risk, but it may be that if you have scarring of the lungs, you're at a disadvantage if you do catch it.
Now that brings us very well to a question from Tonya. And she said, my employer has asked me to have a chest x-ray to make sure that the sarcoid in my lungs is not active or worsened. Should this be something we should all have?
Well, I think your employer's been quite careful. And I definitely think it's a good idea if they've recommended it. I think it's tricky because to say that everybody should have a chest x-ray if they're feeling well and they've not noticed any change in symptoms, I think shouldn't be necessary. But it may be if there is some doubt, or if the employer wants to organise it, great.
Oh, that was a cunning answer, which was yes, if it's a private one, not inflicting the cost on the NHS, go for gold. Otherwise, only if you feel that there has been change in your lungs, and if you feel there's been change in your breathing, then it's advisable to do anyway, because it might be symptomatic of a change in your sarcoidosis.
Yes, I mean, everybody needs to be aware that our chest x-ray and CT scanning resources are really quite limited. And so we do need to be quite careful about how we use those resources.
Yeah, and I think although we're coming out of shielding, there are still a lot of very ill people in hospitals, and these resources remain in intensive use. I think that is a very good point. Right, we had a lot of questions from teachers, and I think that expresses that the challenge, the double challenge in that sector, with obviously the deadline coming up very fast of schools coming back, and the fact that we've been talking about risk assessments, that there just doesn't seem to be crystal clear guidance. Especially like it is very complicated because you compare it to Scotland, where they're saying anyone under the age of 12, just as I understand it, you don't need to social distance, which is certainly one of the reasons we haven't been out with our kids age 1 and 2. Is they do not know how to social distance. They have no idea, no plans. So I think it is very, very complicated. One sort of kick us off in that is that Haley's question was a very good summary. I'm a reception class teacher for 4-year-olds. I've been shielding since March. I've had multi-system sarcoidosis since 2016, and we know that multi-system sarcoidosis carries much more significant risk. Since 2016, I'm now on 3 milligrams of prednisolone a day. My last appointment showed no active sarcoidosis, which is what, congrats, Haley. And her question is an absolute killer. Can a classroom be ever considered COVID secure?
It's a very
nails it as a question.
Absolutely. It's a very good question. It's a very difficult one. I think education, particularly with young children, just can't socially distance, is one of the most challenging
The reason I'm looking so fit right now, obviously I'm always very fit, is that I have to run after my children who are like just begging it towards the nearest person. The more vulnerable, the better. They're just charging straight in that general direction. And I have to catch them before they get within 2 meters. So yeah, it's good for
I think it's very challenging. I think there are a lot of schools that are working really hard on it. They're trying to keep class sizes small. They're trying to keep groups together. As I said, they're trying to avoid sort of stagger groups, breaks and groups, lunch times, and so on. But clearly, you're never going to be able to eliminate that risk, because you don't have control over what happens to those individuals when they leave the classroom. And so I think it's a really tricky one. How do you deal with it?
Where's the data? Like, so obviously Scotland has made that different decision to England. What do you know? What the data is saying about children and their ability to transmit the disease?
Not specifically. I mean, what I would say is obviously that the younger children are obviously at much less risk, and so that is a key factor, I think, in that advice. So it's not so much the children that are at risk. There obviously are rare exceptions, but they make the news because they are rare. So generally, children under 11 don't get the disease badly. That is generally. And it's probably going to be the staff at greater risk. I think the other thing to really think about is how you try and ensure that children with symptoms, if they have symptoms, or if anybody in their household has symptoms, doesn't come to school. And there will be employers that are implementing temperature checks and so on, and questionnaires. And you'd hope that everybody would behave responsibly, because you can't actually enforce or police that. And that's the tricky bit of it.
Yeah, and I think a part of the answer in that is that there is, answering Hayley's question, is that, we've touched on it earlier, there is no such thing as 100% COVID secure. And that there is a balance of risk, and we are learning more all the time. And actually, talking on that balance of risk, there's something I think very fundamental has changed, in that previously we were asked to lock down, to isolate, because we needed to make sure that the NHS didn't get overwhelmed, and we would collectively, that was a part of what we were doing. The NHS now has the capacity. We don't think there's that risk right now, though, as we can see from sudden shutdowns in Spain and second peaks in other countries, that we have to watch the numbers and change things if we need to. But so what that means is, though, that then that risk choice has returned back to us as individuals, and that we then have to start to try and make our own decisions, with the benefit of a risk assessment and working with employers and colleagues.
Yeah. The other thing we haven't talked about much is testing. So
we have no questions on it, so you're free, go.
So there is, for instance, an NIHR COVID-19 app. So it's run through the NIHR Biomedical Research Centre at King's. And that allows people to log on daily and report any symptoms. And it also gives access to research studies that are looking at prevalence, both of active infection and antibody response in communities. And that is a way, it also gives a lot of data. So if you take part in that, if you enter your data daily, you get a chance to see the UK prevalence and incidence data. So you can see where cases are clustered and where there might be cases near you. And you may get offered a chance to enrol in a research study, which might be quite straightforward, because it might just mean being sent a swab testing kit at home every few weeks, or being asked to go to a centre for a blood test. It's just something to think about if you're keen to access more testing, because taking part in research is one way to do that, and there are quite a lot of research studies in community settings going on. So it's just one thing to consider.
And I think it's important that the more people who have sarcoidosis that do get involved with research, it really helps everyone else. You know, we're a rare disease, so actually going and getting involved is a big deal and very important.
Yeah.
We will tweet out and put on our on Facebook the links to that research. Now, do you have any links with it? Because obviously it's in IHR, so.
Yes, I will, Henry, what I'll do is I'll share it with you later, if that's all right.
That sounds great. No, I actually meant you personally. Have you got any involvement with that piece of research, or?
So I'm taking part in the COVID-19 app, and through that I have signed up to, I think, 2 research studies now. I've expressed interest in 2, and one of them I've already been enrolled in and being tested.
Oh.
By being a volunteer participant as well. And most of my colleagues are, you know, we're all trying to take part in research, whether that's vaccine studies or
yeah, I've signed up for one. I actually didn't know about them more, so I will sign up for more. And certainly it is actually incredibly important. Like, we have very few data points on people with sarcoidosis because of its rarity, so it is very important. So everyone watching, that is a really great thing to do. Right, on to and actually, well, I suppose if we're doing testing, the other thing to say is that actually now, if you do feel like you've got symptoms, the testing is now very fast, and you can get tested, I think, the same day or next day, and results are generally within 24 hours, and that's very important in being able to get you the treatment you may need, or get you the knowledge that you know that you and everyone around you needs to isolate. Have you ever? Have you been tested for COVID? Have you had?
Yes, I've had 3 swab tests so far, and 2 antibody tests.
Oh, okay. What have they said?
Well, so far they've all been negative.
Well, it's obviously a good thing, and it's good.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the more knowledge we have, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing, of course, to flag up is that the swab test has a 20% negative rate.
What do you mean by that?
That it will, 20% of people who have COVID who are tested will come up swab negative.
Right.
And the antibody tests aren't perfect either. So there is no perfect test. There can't be, by definition.
Yeah.
So people just need to understand that and be realistic about what the tests can do. No test is perfect, and I think anybody with sarcoidosis knows that, because you have a lot of tests and there's a lot of umming and ahhing in clinic about what tests mean. It's just the same with COVID. If you get a straightforward positive test, that's easy. But if you get a negative test and you're still symptomatic, you might need a repeat test, and so on. Just to be aware of that.
It's an important point. Continue on with teacher questions. So this one, we got a good few. So someone anonymously, actually didn't want to say their name, Chris and Rachel, all asked a similar question, which was together was concerns on returning to work and the challenge of getting children, especially special needs children, to socially isolate. And Rachel's question sums it up well. What should teachers do regarding returning to work? We are expected to move around the classroom, and I'm worried about the health risk to my health, considering I'm on steroids and suffer with fatigue. And this is the question is different to the one before. And it's, should I seek a different role that I can do from home? So these are people considering changing their career choice because of their concerns.
I know, I've already had a slightly similar discussion with someone else, one of my patients, about this. It is really difficult because you're going to have close contact with people. There may be PPE, you may have to wear a mask, you should be wearing aprons and gloves. What is your employer providing for you, and how long do you really want to keep that up? And I think this is so difficult, and this is where it comes down to really weighing up the risks to you, not only health-wise, which is vital, but also economically. Because you may think about seeking a different role, but is there a role available? Can your employer provide a role, or are you going to have to change track? And I think that's going to be quite difficult in the economic environment that we find ourselves in. We're looking at rising unemployment for obvious reasons. I don't think it's going to be straightforward to get new jobs out there. There are jobs, there's a lot of cleaning jobs that are needed. There's a lot of fruit picking, vegetable picking jobs. There's IT jobs. But I'm not sure that somebody who's been working in an educational setting is necessarily either going to want to do those jobs, be able to, or have the skills. So I don't feel able to give individual advice, obviously. I think it's something that has to be weighed up really carefully with you, your family, and thinking about employment prospects and your financial security. And so those circumstances are going to be different for every single person. And I know that sounds a little challenging, but I think that's the reality of the situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, we're not in the time of easy answers. Hey, like
No, we're not. My team will not allow me to use the word unprecedented because they're so fed up with it. So I'm not allowed to use it. So I won't say it again. But that's the truth.
You've edged in an unprecedented.
We haven't done anything like this for 100 years. And 100 years ago, our society was in a very different situation.
Absolutely. Now, we've got, you'd be glad to hear that all our questions are not from teachers, and we have a wide variety, as I think I touched on earlier. So Nita is a dentist, and she asked about her workplace, and I thought it was very interesting. So as a dentist, like clearly will have advice from her association, her dental body. I am a dentist diagnosed with sarcoidosis. And I'm concerned about wearing a mask and PPE and breathing. I would like your advice on whether to resume clinical duties or not.
Sure. Well, again, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because if you're a dentist, then clinical duties are really part of your vocation, what you do.
And my understanding is there's particularly the ability for droplets to be created is particularly strong in dentistry.
Yeah. So you can do some work remotely, you can have telephone consultations with the patients, you can prescribe antibiotics, but at the end of the day, that's not going to sort them out long term if they've got a dental abscess. It's where you're doing the drilling and the scaling and the polishing and all those things and the fillings that you're going to basically be doing an aerosol generating procedure, and you're going to have to wear full PPE. And if you work in large dental practice, then that may already have been procured and be available. But you're absolutely right, it's uncomfortable to wear, it's hot, it's quite tight. As doctors up and down the country and all over the world have discovered, it's quite cumbersome. You do need regular breaks. So certainly, it depends on your air conditioning and where you work and how well they can keep the environment, the cool they can keep the environment, but if it gets hot, it can get very uncomfortable. I don't think it will impede anybody's breathing, but there's no doubt it's claustrophobic. So there's a sensation of possibly restricted breathing, and that is quite tricky to deal with. And I think, the first thing you need to do is to make sure that your work, your employer or whoever it is, or colleagues have procured the PPE and it's available and what is there. And it may be worth you having some practice runs. Certainly in the NHS we have PPE buddies, so everybody works with somebody else who helps them put on the PPE and then helps them take it off safely. And that's just as much a concern, not so much for the breathing challenges that you've raised, but just for the infection challenges, because if you rip off all your PPE at once at the end of the procedure and you don't do it correctly and you don't wash your hands or use hand sanitizer at the right points, you may well end up contaminating yourself and everyone else. and everything near to the waste bin. So it's quite a procedure putting on and taking off PPE. It does need to be done correctly, and it's worth watching videos and it's worth having some assistance. So a helpful assistant who can help you put it all on, secure anything behind you that needs to be secured, like ties, and then help you take it off, remind you at what point you need, what you take off first, and when to use hand sanitizer. That can all be useful. The other thing I'd say is that you do need breaks when you're wearing PPE. As I said before, it does get very claustrophobic. But my understanding is that in most settings, and it will vary from workplace to workplace, the room where you've performed the aerosol generating procedure, the AGP, will not only need to be physically cleaned, there'll certainly need to be a certain number of air changes before the next patient can come in. And that will depend on how efficient your ventilation and air extraction is. So that should give you a natural break. And you won't find that you will be working at the same rate, or that your capacity to do procedures is as great as it was before. Nothing like. So that actually may give you a bit more rest than you think.
Yeah, no, I think so. Do you have a different buddy every time you do your PPE, or is it the same each time?
So where I will need to do aerosol generating procedures is in the endoscopy suite. I'm doing bronchoscopies, and they are set up with a nurse. Might be a different nurse each day, but there will be a nurse who's trained to support in the donning and the doffing, the technical terms.
It sounds like something from the 18th century.
It does, indeed, yes.
We had a comment online, someone that says, well, we're providing badges, I can't wear a mask, but dentists absolutely have to wear FFP3 for many hours. So, I think that's a fair point. I mean, there's only so much we can do with our masks, with our badges, but it is some professions, I think we've talked on it, have to. And she does say she has training in donning and doffing. Thank you, Justine. So actually on the masks and the pressure, the difficulty, the challenge it gives to breathing. Oh, I just did a bad COVID touching my face. If you've already got fibrosis, you've got damage in your lungs, and is there an additional pressure with your breathing when wearing a mask? And if so, can that in any way cause damage to you?
No, it shouldn't cause any damage, but it is claustrophobic.
So it's a feeling, not an actual.
Yes, I mean, you're not going to be exercising. Nobody's going to put you on an exercise bike or ask you to cycle uphill while you're wearing it. What I would say is I think it's a really good idea to practice and see how you get on.
Yeah.
So if you can take a clean mask home if you're allowed to do that, or if you've got a workplace.
And that's particularly you're talking about the medical level masks, which are much more claustrophobic than the very fine cotton ones that we have for sale in the shop.
And I don't think anybody could possibly feel claustrophobic wearing one of those, Henry.
No, well, actually, we've had lots of very, very nice comments about them.
Yes.
Which has been very kind. I've got a lovely question from Kathy, which I can't resist doing. We've still got a few more, don't you worry. But I can't resist putting in. My husband is in the army and works in London, travelling home to Wales periodically. I'm on immunosuppressants and steroids. Is it low risk for him to sleep in the same bed when he comes home? It's 5 months shielding and I need a cuddle.
Yes. Well, this is about working out the balance of risks and benefits, isn't it? I'm sure you do need a cuddle. And actually, that may be much more important than some risk from him working in London and coming to see you and you being immunosuppressed. We can't eliminate physical risk, but we also have to think about our mental health as well.
Yeah. So if in her personal risk profile she thinks it's all right, then she's got a prescription for you for a cuddle.
Yes, but I can't eliminate the risk.
Very good. That's wonderful. Right, let's do some, because we talked about this before and I wanted to cover it again. So Kate said she needs us to use public transport to get to work. She wears a mask and avoids peak times where she can. Are there any other precautions she should take? And I know you take public transport, so I think the better version of, well, I'm trying to say, Kate, that wasn't a good question, it is. But the question I quite like is, Robina, what are you doing when you take public transport? What precautions are you taking?
Yes. Well, actually, I'm driving to work at the moment.
You've just gone out.
Well, I'm fortunate. I mean, I have a parking permit at work, so. But yes,
those things are rare.
I've got colleagues who are using public transport.
If you were to use public transport, what would you do?
I would do exactly what you're doing. Obviously, wear a mask. You need to be really careful. You need to put it on at home with clean hands. I mean, wash your hands first. You then need not to touch it until you get to your destination, and you can take it off. And then you need to take it off by the ear loops and not touch the front of it. And you either need to dispose of it if it's disposable in a suitable bin, or you need to put it in a clean plastic bag which you can then seal and take it home and wash it in the evening. And you should bring a clean mask for your journey back. So that's the masks. Obviously try to touch as little as possible while you're out and about on the underground. Carry hand sanitizer with you and use it if you have touched surfaces. Wash your hands when you get to work. And wash your hands before you set out, so frequent hand washing. Try and sit as far apart from other people as you can. I don't think, if it were me, I would not be using my mobile phone on the tube, because we know our mobile phones get very heavily contaminated. And so if you've touched the surface, and then you touch your mobile phone, and then you use that phone later on and you put it to your ear, you could contaminate all sorts of parts of you. And mobile phones are not necessarily very clean, so I would avoid using your mobile phone. I would think about everything that you're touching during that journey. Be careful where you put your Oyster card. These are only things that, hopefully pragmatic and common sense. Official guidance, there's no evidence, but I think just reducing contact with everything as much as possible, touching as little as possible, remembering not to touch your face, just the other things that you can do.
And what about clothes, like the clothes you're wearing? If you've got a coat and you're sitting on the seat.
Yes. Well, again, just think where you put your coat when you get into work. Can you hang it up somewhere where it can be undisturbed and out of the way for a few hours before you put it back on? Those sorts of considerations. Yes, I think there's a limit to what you can do, but those are things you can do.
We've had a lot of questions from those who've been shielding and are worried about members of their household. Obviously, Kate and her husband in the army is an example. Gary asked, my partner, a care home nurse, and daughter are returning to work, and should I increase distancing within my household? And in the same vein, my husband has a lung and cardiac sarcoidosis on 10 milligram methotrexate and 7 milligram prednisolone. Do children have to go back to, and for them, do children have to go back to school? And if so, then should my husband keep away from them?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't think we really know the answer. Again, there is an increased risk. The more circulation there is, the more we move around, the more people we meet, the greater the risk. I think it depends what you can manage realistically in your household. If you think you can physically distance, that may be a safer option. But we're in this, I think, for the long haul, at least for several more months, if not more. And it's how you do that long term. And again, it does probably go back a little bit as well to what I was talking about data. If you know the prevalence in your area, and I know there were some questions about this as well, Henry, you will have a better idea of what the risk is where you are at the time. And actually, are there very few cases, in which case the risk is probably lower, or are you in an area of high prevalence when you may need to be more careful? So this answer may need to be modified both geographically and in time.
And I think that is a very important point, and you can get on a daily basis, I think, your council area COVID rate. And I think one of the things we need to recognise is that the reason we're able to go back to work, that shielding is getting dropped as a formal thing, and lockdown has been dropped, is that the infection amount of infection out in the populace is much lower now. So your chances of getting it are much lower, but it's here. We are in for the long haul, and for us to maintain a life, we need to keep that number low. In terms of the shielding in the home, one of the things I think that we do at home is, we've made, the home is a safe space. So as soon as you come in, you wash your hands. I bicycle. My wife takes the tube, so she actually does. She gets changed out of those clothes, and she's been at work, out of those clothes and into different clothes before she'll come into the main rooms. And so the idea of our interpretation, or as our balance, is to create the safe space of our home and really be very careful on how we're letting things into that, and always washing hands, always taking anything we think might carry slightly higher risk, like the clothes, changing out of those. Because I think, as you pointed out, for mental health, for life, because I think this is a long time, we need to be with our loved ones.
Absolutely, really important.
We had a really good question from Kevin, and allows me to get irate at the people who think they're too inconsiderate to wear masks in shops. It's quite one thing to be careless with your own life, and if you wish to do that, then that's on you. But to be careless with other people's is not right. Kevin wrote, "I work in a small shop, and there are shields up for the staff. Some customers have been refusing to wear masks, and staff have been told not to approach them. As in, tell them, how can I keep myself safe in this situation? I'm thinking about not going back, as I'm on a 4-week flare-up with my steroids up." And so this is about how Kevin can keep himself safe in the fact when some other people are just choosing and is considering not going back to his job because some people don't want to wear masks, and who don't have, because obviously we have lots of people with a lung condition who can't wear masks, but these are people who just don't want to, and actually, as someone, I obviously go to the shops. They're the people who really worry me, because they are de facto the more careless people. And so not only are they therefore not wearing masks, they're also probably riskier people to be around. Okay, over to you. What can Kevin do?
Yes, it's a very good question, Kevin, and it's very difficult. I guess if you're serving customers and you have a shield up, one option might be for you to wear a mask and a visor, a clear plastic visor. I think they're probably quite good. You've got 2 levels of protection, so you've got the sort of aerosol droplet protection, and you've got immediate protection.
A nice summary of that is that kind of basically you get to double up. So where you wear a mask and a visor, and hopefully
yes.
that'll.
Because again, I've just been a little bit cautious about just not going back to work, because at the moment I'm not sure what your employer is going to do with that.
That is a good question, because it becomes a refusal to work, and it becomes very challenging. And if it's I think he said it's a small shop, so we don't know if that's a small Tesco or which will have the resources and a big HR department to be able to look at this or not. I have to say, Kevin, I'm very sorry that some people are doing that to you, putting you in that position. And I think those people need to. I wish they'd look at themselves a bit a bit harder in their actions and their actions on other people. And by great happenstance, and because I put it there, we had a question on screens from Denise. She said, we had a lot of questions on the screens actually. Denise summed it up. I'm worried about returning to work in the pub. Will a screen give enough protection, or would I need to wear a mask shield?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're in contact with somebody, is face to face through a shield, that should be enough. It's if you're moving around different areas where you're not separated by a shield, then it may be worth you thinking about a mask.
Yeah, and I think if one of the things is that wearing a mask is something you can do at your individual discretion, and it will help, and it will help both the people you're serving and yourself in part, and and so therefore why not? Although they are after a long period, slightly claustrophobic. We've had a lot of questions on Facebook and before. They all do sort of like I've got the grandparents to my kids, so one has an underlying there's some underlying condition there, and for my kids to be able to see their grandparents and their grandparents to be able to see their kids. We had Ali ask, what do I need to put in place when my stepdaughter comes to say she's 18, and at the same time as Gillian said my granddaughter is going back to dancing. Is it safe for me to see her and her two brothers? So,
Yeah. I mean, I think inevitably the risk is greater the more people you meet. So you have to, we're in a slightly unenviable situation at the moment where we're having to prioritise who we meet, how often, and who we spend more time with. So I think for people for whom it's essential that you meet, if they are out and about meeting other people, they need to be careful when they're doing that. And then, of course, it depends how much space you have at home. Do you have more than one bathroom? Can that person use that bathroom and you don't use the same bathroom so that you avoid those shared facilities? You hope they have their own room. And then it's about socially distancing. It's difficult, isn't it, in a kitchen or a dining room or a sitting area? That's very difficult. So there isn't a right or a wrong answer or a particular set of guidelines, I think, that you can give. You just have to think about it on a case-by-case basis and think about what the other person is doing and how that might affect you.
And I think the point you're conveying as well is that it's not all about just about seeing that person. It's how you see that person. It's have you everyone washed their hands? Are they maintaining a sensible distance? Are they not shouting and singing and doing things that are going to cause a lot of droplets? Because those are the things. So you can see someone and really reduce the risk profile of that. The risk will still be there, and you can see someone and have a very high risk profile if you're hugging and singing and all the rest of things that are going to increase that droplet and increase that risk.
Yeah.
And I know we've got you for another few more minutes, because I think you've got to go at 25 past. But you've, as ever, and always very generous with your time. So Gillian has written about vaccines.
Yes.
And obviously we're very keen not to engage the anti-vax lobby, and as vaccines have been shown to invoke immunoresponse. It's like it's the definition of a vaccine, people. To COVID-19 regarding antibodies and T cells, how would this possibly affect those on immunosuppressants, and could it cause a sarcoid flare-up? I think there is a fair question in there, because you are causing an infection, and the vaccine is dependent on your immunosuppressant response. So
It's a very good question. I think there's a couple of things I'd sort of say generally about vaccines. I think there's always at the back of one's mind a slight concern, or there could be, for many people, about the speed of vaccine development. I mean, it's been quite incredible and a huge effort, and therefore I suppose, there are potentially concerns about vaccine safety in that regard, but actually there are a number of reasons that actually the vaccine research has taken off so quickly. One is there's been really outstanding international and commercial and academic partnerships and collaboration and financing because of the will globally to find a solution to the dilemma we're all in.
So I think that's financing. I mean, there's a lot of things that with money can just speed up. And like, for instance, some of the research we've done, it's taken 4, 5, 6 months just to go through some of the regulatory hurdles, which are not because they're particularly time consuming. It's just because there aren't many people reviewing them. And
so all those things have made a huge difference. The science, of course, and the technology is advancing all the time at a very massive speed. So that's another reason.
Yeah. Also, importantly, vaccines people aren't new. So it's not like we're creating an entirely. We're building a new building, having built lots of many buildings in the past. It's not we're doing something completely brand new.
And the other reason they've advanced so quickly, of course, is because there's been a real pool of volunteers who've been ready and willing and eager, indeed, to take part.
Okay, I'm signed up, but you've actually done them.
So, that is not always the case. So that, I think, explains the speed of the vaccine development in terms of clinical trials. I think it's really great. Now, could the vaccine worsen your sarcoid? Well, most vaccines do work by stimulating the immune system because they're training the immune system to recognise a foreign protein. And I'm not aware of any evidence that sarcoidosis patients are particularly vulnerable to flares of their condition after vaccination of any other kind. And I don't think there should be a huge difference with the COVID-19 vaccine. I don't think the data are there. But that is something that will be monitored very, very closely. The advantage of taking part in research is that we always say you almost get private healthcare on the NHS because every possible side effect or symptom will be monitored and every possible change in somebody's condition will be monitored very, very closely.
And Mal Beckley on Facebook has asked that question: Is it safe to sign up for vaccine trials?
Yeah. So, and if you sign up for a vaccine trial and you tell people you've got sarcoidosis, they're going to be very, very careful about that. And that's going to be part of the risk assessment as to whether you're eligible. So I think that we don't have any evidence that they do. We don't have any evidence that they don't at the moment. But vaccines have not been a particular problem generally for patients with sarcoidosis in the past.
And they are advised, and I think people with sarcoidosis, for instance, have recommended to have the flu vaccine as an example. And what?
Pneumococcal vaccine.
Right.
Absolutely, we've discussed that before. So there's no evidence that it would, but I do recognise it's a completely unknown entity. So there's always going to be a little bit of concern until we get more data.
And they are looking to sign up, I mean, really a very large number of people to test on before it goes nationally, but speed is very important. So I think to Gillian, it's not expected to affect those with immunosuppressants or cause a sarcoid flare up, and in fact is an important thing to reduce the risk of something much worse happening, which is the fundamental of vaccines generally. That is like we are at 24 minutes past according to my clock, and I know you've got to go at 25. So that gives me exactly a minute, which is never not enough time to say thank you. You are like it's been extremely insightful. A lot of very important answers. I know we've answered, I think, the broad brush of everything that was asked, and there's a few on Facebook which might be a bit more specific, which you didn't quite get to, but hopefully people have got the broad answers that as well as could be given, because as we all know, it's a changing circumstance and unprecedented. No one's told me I can't say it. thank you so much. It's meant a lot. You've done a lot of these, and they've meant a lot every single time, and helped a lot of people. So thank you very much indeed. So I'm thanking for everyone who's watching, and just wish you very well, and thank you again.
And thank you, Henry. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Well, bye and thank you. Bye to everyone who's joined us. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for being part of the Sarcoidosis UK community. We're obviously here to help, and we try and put up as much information as we possibly can on the website. If you want to have personal conversations through your donations, we're able to fund nurses' helplines where anyone can call, and the call length is unlimited in time, so you can call for as long as you need. And they're there to help, and I've obviously talked to so many people who have a really high level of expertise. And if you come off that call and think you want to call them again, then we can set that up as well. So that's not a problem. We've built out our information with the help of Robina and others on our clinical board. And as you know, on the shop, we've got the masks and the badges to show to people that you need more care around you, or that you can't wear a mask, and masks for those who can wear them. We are starting to do virtual events. We've had some great events with lots of people climbing Everest in their home, going up and down their stairs, and we're shortly doing we're signed up with Prudential's cycle race for people to do the cycle at home as well, and look out for more of those. It's obviously incredibly important. This would normally be our big fundraising time, and it's not there. So if you're able to support those people, or if you're able to donate, there's no more important time than now. We, like every other charity, are massively suffering, but at the same time trying to do much more than we've ever done before. And we are here to help. So look, it's again a great thank you very much for being part of our community. Thank you for joining Robina. Thank you to Robina again, and thank you everyone. So, and goodbye from me, and I look forward to talking to you guys again soon. Bye bye.